when you have eliminated the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth.
Director and co-writer Francesco Cinquemani, at least that's how I think you pronounce that name, brings us The Ghosts of Monday. And this one stars Julian Sands, and for any of you horror fans out there, you'll recognise him from probably the most famous role he's done, that of Warlock, both 1 and 2. He was also in Arachnophobia, Tales of a Vampire, Boxing Helena, to name but a few. A fairly kind of like recognisable actor from the kind of the 80s and 90s and things like this. He's done a few things kind of more recently. This is one of them. Now, when I tell you the plot synopsis, it's going to sound like a found footage movie. It isn't. This is not a found footage movie. It is filmed in a traditional style. But it does involve a kind of a plot synopsis, which is somewhat typical of found footage for movies. We have a group of documentarians who want to kind of make a pilot for some type of paranormal reality TV show and things like that. So they travel to Cyprus to visit this hotel, which has been abandoned for 20 or so years and has a history of bad things, shall we say. Now, apparently we learned through some exposition that the ground where this hotel was built was somehow kind of cursed, you know, ancient burial grounds, all that kind of thing. But more recently, you know, 20 or so years ago, when the hotel was actually constructed, it was the site of a mass murder where 100 or so people were killed through putting rat poisoning in the food in this, obviously in this hotel, and killing, you know, around 100 people. And the owners committed suicide, and it's essentially been abandoned since then, and the locals won't go near it. And now we have this documentary film crew want to kind of do an investigation in it. So that's your kind of set up here, and as you can probably guess, you know, this hotel may be harbouring some type of dark paranormal force. Now, what that force is and what happens, you have to watch the movie and find out. So let me talk about what I think works in this movie. Now, this might sound like I'm being somewhat facetious, but I will say the thing that struck me most about this film is its technical elements. Because this movie, I will say, was particularly kind of well shot. Now, having this kind of movie set in kind of Cyprus and having this kind of somewhat of a different location, this kind of grand hotel, was nice. But what really made it for me was some really kind of well photographed scenes and some great cinematography. There's some great use of kind of lighting here. There's one particular kind of sequence, for example, where we have a character that ends up into water, and the kind of the way the kind of it's lit with this kind of to really can make it this kind of eerie, and you don't quite know what's going on and what's around her and stuff. It's very well done. But even sequences, for example, that are shot in the dark, you know, we get enough kind of light so we can kind of see what's going on, but the dark areas still look really kind of dark and kind of foreboding. So that was quite good. The cinematography here is very good, and you know, just the movie in general, the way it is shot, I will say is very, very proficient. But that's not what I think. Things like, for example, sound design as well, the kind of all that kind of area was very well handled. And there are some pretty decent kind of practical effects here. There isn't loads of it, but we kind of see a kind of a particular kind of a creature, I would say, without kind of spoiling anything here, which is a practically, practical makeup and things like that. And it's done to a pretty good standard. You don't see huge amounts of it, so I never really feel like I got a particularly kind of good look. But I thought it was interesting here, and I felt like it harkens to certain kind of mythologies and things like this, which I thought was quite interesting. And the other thing I would say here is this movie is very, very ambitious. It tries to have somewhat of an original plot that still has elements of familiarity in it, things that you've kind of seen before, but it tries to weave many different elements into kind of one story. And again, I don't want to give anything too much away, but there's a variety of different styles of kind of horror elements in this movie that is, okay, very ambitious. And, you know, weave different types of antagonists, different types of threats into this kind of story. And like I kind of briefly mentioned as well, I think having this located in Cyprus, for example, which is traditionally known as somewhat of a tourist location for many, you know, bright sunny beaches and things like this. It's this lovely looking kind of hotel, which we're meant to believe is abandoned, and it's clearly kind of had been up, you know, the upkeep has been pretty good on it. It's clearly not been abandoned for 20 years, but you know, think something like that we can kind of let go. It looks great, this hotel. It does give it this kind of like this old-fashioned feel to it, though, because the construction, the architecture of this hotel, you know, feels like it's you know, somewhat of a throwback in its architecture and stylings and things like that. But it's a great location, and I like having this kind of a movie set in Cyprus. It is an English spoken language movie. And I think there's maybe more they could have done with that, but at least I kind of like the idea. We do get kind of scenes of this kind of giving you this kind of somewhat of a flavour from the kind of the area and stuff. Okay, so that's what I think works with the movie. What doesn't work with the movie? Okay, so a few things with this one I will have to say that I think culminate in somewhat of a the movie kind of suffering under its own weight. The acting I don't think is particularly kind of solid, unfortunately. We have this crew, and you know, Julian Sands' character is part of this kind of crew, and he's kind of the host of this kind of show. But I've got to be honest with you, the majority of the acting, not all, but the majority of the actors here, unfortunately, are on the weaker side. And I'm sorry to say, it's the ones that have the most screen time, I feel, are probably the weaker actors. Our main couple, the guy has the same expression on his face the whole movie, and there's some kind of somewhat kind of stifled line delivery is the best way I can kind of say this. You know, the wife as well, not particularly good. Julian Sands, I think, is he seems to be kind of tripping over his lines a little bit here and there. So the acting isn't particularly good, but I would say that what kind of doubles down on that is the characterization is paper thin. So I really didn't feel like I got to know any of the characters here. You only get the kind of the briefest kind of like little kind of ideas about their kind of personality, their relationships and stuff. I really didn't understand the dynamic of this team when we have these kind of you know, the director, the kind of the host, the camera girl, the sound girl. You know, it was hard to kind of pinpoint their kind of chemistry, if that makes sense, because I felt the characters weren't particularly kind of well developed. I mean, all we really get from, like, you know, for example, is Julian Sands' character is a bit of a kind of sexual predator, by the sounds of it, a bit of a drunken kind of lech. But at least he had some character, I would say. The rest of them, including our main couple, severely lacking. You know, there's some arguments and stuff, and I'm thinking, I'm not quite sure what they're arguing. I'm not really feeling their kind of relationship here. So we've got subpar acting, we've got somewhat kind of poor characterization, okay. The story elements here, I've mentioned I think this movie is ambitious, and that is true, but that also comes with a risk, because this movie is trying to layer in so many ideas, it is just buckling under its own weight. I don't want to spoil anything for you, but suffice to say we have a multitude of different kind of like antagonistic forces, let me just kind of put it like this, and some of them you're just like, huh? I mean, I guess when you think about this story, you can understand what they were trying to do. You know, they were trying to set up that there's, you know, there's some type of cult behaviour kind of going on here. We got kind of like the supernatural elements of this kind of like these ghosts that are haunting this kind of hotel. You know, we have this kind of this deity that these kind of cultists were kind of worshipping, and we get that obviously people are kind of, you know, been sacrificed to it for, you know, means to an end basically. So we're layering various kind of elements into this movie, and unfortunately it's just trying to do too much and not handling what it's got, unfortunately. The movie as well is dramatically unscary. For a horror film, and maybe I'm just jaded, you know, this movie, I never once got a kind of a, you know, an idea that someone might be a little bit chilled by this film, a little bit kind of spooky atmosphere. This movie really lacked any type of, you know, horror atmosphere to it. It just seemed to kind of like, probably because you weren't buying into the characters, to be honest, but, you know, you were never really kind of getting this kind of like this spookiness. You know, the movie doesn't kind of like take its time, because it's got so much kind of going on in it, to really have this kind of creepiness factor that ever in this movie. There are a couple of shots here, you know, like I think that looks aesthetically good, like the girl in the kind of the water just being kind of, you know, pursued by stuff. In the bubble, you can think, okay, it's filmed well, and I understand the kind of the horror elements here, but you never really kind of feel like you get to know the characters. There's never that build up. It just kind of feels like it's there. Oh, there's something else here. Oh, there's some type of other kind of like paranormal thing that's happening here. So you kind of, it never really has a kind of a fear factor. One technical element that I really did not think worked particularly well is this movie keeps having these cutaways where we see like a ghost's point of view, or a kind of something watching, and or we see something crawling around, and it just kind of cuts away, and we keep seeing all these kind of things happening, and all these kind of like points of view, and it's so poorly done. That's the one technical element here that I guess the editing I think was quite poor here, because it really deflates, I think, some of the kind of the tension here. They would have been better off just not having those kind of cutaways, and you know, we could kind of find out through other means that you know, that there's something kind of creepy kind of going on, and the actual kind of plot itself in regards to, you know, the journey that it wants to take us on, the kind of the motivation, so to speak, about what's going on. Again, it's just kind of like convoluted and confused, because you've got all these kind of plates spinning at the same time, with unconvincing actors who are poorly characterized, things like this, and it just can't sustain it. It just can't sustain audience interest. It's not particularly kind of scary, and I think some of the kind of the horror elements here, they could have kind of made it a kind of scarier movie, a spookier movie. It doesn't have to be gory. I mean, there's also a little bit of a horrible CGI blood as well in places. I mean, that was pure laziness, because there's a close-up of someone getting stabbed with CGI blood. How hard would it have been to have a tube with like some fake blood coming out? Honestly. So this movie ultimately, I feel, is quite unsatisfying. I don't think it's necessarily a terrible movie. I think the ambition here is you know, to be commended, and the technical elements. So I don't want to take anything away from the technical elements, because it takes a lot of people to make a film. So I'm not going to say this film, oh, it's crap, because I feel there are some skilled people who have made this movie. But as a story, it is not particularly interesting. The acting, I think, is a little subpar. Characterization is weak. The editing is a little bit choppy. Overall, this is not a good movie. It's not even an average movie. It is a below average movie, but I do think there are some elements here that deserve some praise. And I will say, I appreciate a movie that has ambition and takes a swing but maybe misses, compared to a film which is just kind of like, doesn't try anything new and is boring and dull. I feel at least this movie has the gumption to have a swing at somewhat of a sprawling, complicated, overly ambitious kind of plot, but unfortunately misses the mark. Maybe other people won't be able to see that necessarily, but I kind of appreciate the attempt. But ultimately, this still isn't a particularly good movie. It's a below average movie, but I will give it a 4 out of 10 because I do feel there's a couple of redeeming elements. Have you seen it? What did you think? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.